Since it's a weekend after Rosh Hashanah, I'd like to talk a little about Talmud Torah in the context of Teshuva. Famous Brayso Maseches Yuma and Daf Pevav, V'dalech Chiluki Kapara, Arva Mitzvah Say, V'shav Mochlo, Mitzvah Lo Say, Teshuva Yom Kippurim, Akrisu Mrs. Bezdin, then Rachon San Yisurim, and then you have Chil Hashem. The Ben Yoyin Shari Teshuva in Shir Aleph talks about Krisus Mises Bezdin. So there's Yisurim Achon Teshuva, Yom Kippur, and Yisurim Amarkim. So he says there's a way out of Yisurim, and he connects it to the pasuk in Mishlei. B'chesed ve'emes yuchupar avon. The pasuk in Mishlei says, with chesed and emes, chesed leads to kapara. So what does that mean? We know it doesn't mean that without tshuva you get kapara. Kadosh Baruch Hu is nalokeach shochad mitzvos. It says through, we're talking about someone who does tshuva, but if he wants to avoid yisurim with necessary kapara, there are ways to do it through the being osek in chesed and emes. Chesed, we know what it means. Chesed talks about tzedakah, gemilas chasadim. What's emes? Says the Ben Yonah, keneged kulam mitzvahs Talmud Torah l'shem shemayim. The most significant way, the greatest way to avoid yisurim is limud Torah l'shem shemayim. Ki kinyan Torah nikra kinyan ha'emes. Kamo she'amar emes k'nei b'altzim kor. V'namar soroscha emes. That kinyan Torah is emes. Torah is called emes. Kinyan Torah is kinyan emes. And if the pasuk says b'ches v'emes yuchabar avon, it's obviously not talking about without tshuva. It's talking about when someone needs more than tshuva. So what do you need more than tshuva? You need yisurim. Rachmana litzlan. So ches and emes, and he says keneged kulam, most dramatically, significantly, emes can substitute for yisurim. And he quotes a medrash. V'amar zechar v'ach eitzchaim machzigim ba'avar al krisus amises bezdin. In my ragel look echa b'yom b'kashnei prakim. My ragel look parish achas k'shnei parashos. Says a person needs kapara. So over averos, terrible averos, so he shall learn more Torah. Doesn't mean he shouldn't do tshuva. That's on top of tshuva. But he wants to get kapara before yisurim, do learn more tshuva. And he says there's two aspects to this. Mishnei parim tagain olav Torah min yisurim. Ha'achas ki amr zechron avacha Talmud Torah k'nei kulam. V'ashenis ki yosem amalo b'Torah v'torchabo v'asher tidad shnasom minav aleh b'mokom yisurim. Kamoshem v'chron avacha kol agufim lamol yuladu. Asher mishagia shelo b'Torah. V'amru lomnek shmatushia shemateshes kocha shalatim. He says there are two aspects, in two ways, is limud Torah, the limud Torah substitute for yisurim. He says the first, we'll talk about that again maybe in another minute, is Talmud Torah k'nei kulam. I may try to explain that a little more. And the second is because amelus. Because a person is omel b'Torah. I mean, this person who's drug look b'yom, presumably has a full schedule. But if you can find time to learn a little more, which requires extra effort, extra work, maybe a little bit less sleep, to push themselves hard. So that's a certain level of yisurim. It's a certain level of causing oneself discomfort, and those yisurim will substitute the yisurim that person needs to have for kapara. Called adam la'amal yulad. So if it's amal through Torah, then that can substitute. That can be the yisurim. He says that's one of two aspects. The first aspect is he says Talmud Torah and Kulam. I think what he's alluding to is what he said before. The pasuk is b'chesed ve'emes yuchubar avon. Talmud Torah is called emes. What does it mean it's called emes? So it doesn't. Torah is true. That's correct. Torah is true. There are things, one can make statements that are true, but emes in this context, the Torah means more than just it is factually true. The Ram says in the Torah that we say Hashem Elokim Emes. What Hashem Elokim Emes means? Hu levado ha emes ve'ein la'acher emes ka'amito. V'usha Torah omeres ein od milvado klom ein sham matzui emes milvado kamoso. That there is a subjective emes, there's emes within a certain context, and then there's the real emes. Because Baruch Hu is the emes of reality. And Torah is Chachma Elokis. Remember in Sechah Shabbos, Anochi, Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yehovis, that the Kosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol allowed us to connect to the extent that we can connect. The Kosh made himself connectable, but he brought himself into this world in the context, most deeply in the context of Torah, and throughout Limud Torah, the Baal Tanya talks about we sort of can cling to Kosh Baruch Hu through the Torah through which he expresses himself, and if Hashem Elokim is emes, then the Torah is the expression of the deepest and truest emes. Yisurim, in part perhaps, are there because Chet, what Chet that's allowed to continue is, in a certain sense, detracts from emes. The emes in the world is a Kosh Baruch Hu's presence. When there's Chet in the world, when a person acts in a way that's against Ratzon Kosh Baruch Hu, so that indicates an absence of Kosh Baruch Hu's presence, and when there's no Midas Adin that relates to that, so then it's Kilu less than less dayan. So the Yisurim, to some extent, are to demonstrate that there's an emes. If a person focuses on the kinyan emes and brings emes in the world through his Talmud Torah, through this person becoming a Kli Torah, there's more emes in the world, emes expressed to more people in the world. That's a balance for the lack of emes that is brought about through Chatoim. Earlier in Shari Teshuva, in Shar Aleph, Rebbeinu also quotes this pasuk, and there he doesn't mention Talmud Torah explicitly. I think he alludes to it, but in light of what he says here, I think that's Bechlal Dvarav. In Shar Aleph, Os Mem Zayin, it says, Hashiv Asar, Lirdov Pulas Achesed V'emes. Kinyan Shneamar, B'chesed Mishchu Baravon, V'yas Hashem Sumira. Talking about the Darchei Teshuva, one Darchei Teshuva is to be Rodev Pulas Chesed V'emes. And he says there are Averos that Teshuva, Yom Kippur, Tolem, V'sur Memarkim, and Chesed and Emes help for that. He focused more on Chesed at that point. V'od yesh avon u'avon chil Hashem. If someone's avon chil Hashem, and the Mishnah says in Avos, echad shoygev echad mezid b'chil Hashem. Chil Hashem is something that's very, l'tzarenu, difficult, easy to fall into, and something that is of the worst, of the highest consequence. Teshuva yisurim tolim u'misa marekes. K'mo shnamar im yuchubar avon z'adi musun. So Rebbeinu says that's not entirely true. There is a way to get a kapar of chil Hashem also. Kasher other mishtadel l'smoch biyad ha'emes v'yazor acharav v'sodei b'drav v'yofia oro le'enei b'nei amo v'yichazeki anshe emes v'nasu rosham v'chitos ha'sheker ha'shlem ad eretz yagim ad offer ne'ela darchei kiddush Hashem v'hod v'ador le'munoso v'adoso ba'olam al-kein barbos polav kadesh Hashem l'odei ha'emes l'chinos osado v'nislach me'evon chil Hashem im ha'tshuva b'sumo ha'emes l'mas ashman chil midas tshuvaso k'negem mishuvaso zeu be'yor chesed v'nes yuchubar. The same pasuk he quotes later in Shari Teshuva, which he says is most the emes is which is most completely expressed through most primarily expressed through Limud Torah, Kinyan Torah, specifically Kinyan Torah L'Shem Shemayim, or Torah L'Shma with appreciation that's emes. So that same pasuk he says gives a person capacity to miskaper for Chil Hashem. How so? Because Chil Hashem was Chil. Chil means the emptiness. Chalal is empty. The emptiness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's presence. And the way to make up for emptiness of Hakadosh Baruch Hu's presence is to fill the world with Chil Hashem is Sheker. But the way to make up for it is to make Hayashem Shemayim, bring the emes in the world. And the way that is expressed mostly is through Talmud Torah. And Rebbeinu Yoni adds not just through one's own personal Talmud Torah, even to b'chazik people learning Torah, to spread Torah. But Torah is the emes, that's the antidote, the counterbalance for Chil Hashem. So it comes to the season of Teshuva, so we have to be Teshuva all the time. But it comes to the season we're focused most on Teshuva. So one of the primary ways, one of the aspects in which we can try to achieve our own kapara is through focus on Limud Torah, specifically through Amelus in Torah, which can serve as the Rabbeinu as a substitute for Yisurim, and for appreciation that Torah is the emes, and Chet and Chil Hashem takes away from the emes, and if we understand that we're focused on emes, that can help us to repair teshuva. I just mentioned one in the Tziv in last week's parasha on the pasuk in the middle of Teichacha. In Los Shmor LaAsos is called the Torah Asos Ksvim BaSefer Azel Rosh Shem Nechbav and Rosh Shem Elokecha. So it says if you, the Tocha will continue in Los Shmor LaAsos is called the Torah Azos Liras Hashem etc. So the Tziv reads the pasuk as two separate parts. The first part in Los Shmor LaAsos called the Torah Azos, and Tziv reads the reference to learning Torah and learning Torah well. Most all of a sudden, the end of the pasuk says reference Liras Hashem, reference to tefillah and tinius, which means tshuva. But when someone has Klai Yisrael's Yisurim, the reaction has to be tefillah and tshuva, but it also has to be doubling down in limud Torah, be'ir limud Torah, well limud Torah with amelus. In Lo Sishmos la'asos is called Devar Torah Azos. That's the reaction has to be. It's the reaction has to do with Tzoros and Klai Yisrael, which we're experiencing, and presumably, it's also a way to react to Torah for Yachid, that along with Tefillah and Tshuva, is again doubling down. Lo Sishmor Lasas called Devar Torah Azos, Bechesed ve'emes Yehu Barav.